The aisle wasn't loud. It snapped. "This seat is for real VIP passengers. Move. Now." Casey Reed's voice sliced through the cabin like metal dragged across glass. She stood inches from Helen Porter, finger raised, trembling with the kind of anger that wasn't about rules, it was about who she thought belonged here. The overhead lights washed Casey in a cold white glow, sharpening every edge of her expression. Passengers looked up. A few froze mid-gesture. And in the tight corridor of row 2, time stalled. Helen didn't blink. The woman everyone saw, a 6'2" black passenger in a gray sweater stained with a fresh splash of coffee, stood perfectly still, her breath steady, her posture calm. The spill, still damp, spread across the knit fabric like a bruise the world could see. It hadn't been hers to begin with. Casey knew that. The cabin crew knew that. But the stain became the weapon. Behind Casey, a younger flight attendant stepped aside, unsure. Behind Helen, 2 pilots hovered, one with wide, shocked eyes, the other frowning, jaw tight. The tableau matched the tension. Accusation versus composure, noise versus silence. Casey leaned closer. "I'm not repeating myself. This cabin is reserved for priority guests, people who actually paid to be here." Her finger nearly touched Helen's collarbone. Nearly. A few passengers gasped under their breath. A mother pulled her child closer. A businessman lowered his newspaper. The air wasn't just tense, it felt charged, like the plane had been struck by something invisible but violent. One drop of coffee rolled down Helen's sweater. Down. Then gone. Still, she did not speak. Before the cabin could reset, Casey snapped at her crew. "Mark her seat, invalid. She's causing disruption." Whispers flickered through row 3. Disruption? She hasn't even said anything. But that was the point. Silence, to some people, was defiance. Then Casey aimed her words like a blade. "Ma'am, people who look like them," she gestured at a wealthy couple behind Helen, "belong in first class. Not you. So either move or security removes you." The cabin inhaled sharply. Helen lifted her chin a fraction, no more than a breath's width, but enough to shift the air. "Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here." Now, back to Helen Porter. Because in this moment, this frozen electric moment, nobody on that plane knew the truth. The woman they were trying to humiliate was one of the owners of the airline. Something in the cabin shifted. Not because Casey got louder, but because Helen didn't. She stood there, shoulders squared but relaxed, her breath even, as if the chaos wasn't swirling inches from her face. The stain on her sweater had dried into a dark, uneven bloom, but Helen didn't touch it, didn't brush at it, didn't acknowledge it. The restraint alone made her presence heavier than any outburst could have. Passengers watched her the way people watch a cliff before it breaks. But Helen Porter had never been the one to break. At 62, she carried a stillness that came only from decades of being underestimated by staff, by strangers, by rooms she would later own. And here, inside row 2 of Flight 381, that stillness wrapped around her like armor. Casey mistook it for weakness. Most people like her did. She crossed her arms sharply. "Ma'am, if you're not going to comply, I will call the captain." Her voice wavered just slightly, not enough for passengers to notice, but enough for Helen to hear. The younger flight attendant, Emily, took a small step forward, barely perceptible. Her fingers trembled at her sides. She looked at Helen with something fragile, almost apologetic. Helen offered no reaction. Not yet. Her eyes drifted instead to the reflection in the polished metal of the galley wall. A woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, a smudge of coffee on her chest, and a calm that unsettled those who expected panic. Calm was always her language. Once, in a boardroom filled with men twice her size and half her caution, she had stood just like this, silent, waiting, letting their arrogance bend the room before she spoke. Today felt no different. Another room, another assumption, another storm she didn't have to shout over. Casey snapped again. "Ma'am, answer me. Are you refusing instructions?" Helen blinked slowly. Just once. And the blink said everything Casey didn't know how to read. "I am not here to play your game. I am not afraid of your authority. I have survived much louder rooms than this. Emily watched her with wide eyes, realizing too late that silence could be the most dangerous response of all. Behind them, the pilot with the shocked face took a hesitant step forward. Casey, maybe we should slow down. She shot him a glare sharp enough to slice. I have procedures to follow. Now. But Helen finally lifted her head only slightly, and the pilot stopped speaking altogether, because her presence didn't feel like a passenger anymore. It felt like power waiting for a moment, a match waiting for oxygen, and the cabin was already full of air. The tension didn't rise like a scream. It rose like pressure in a sealed cabin, quiet, invisible, crushing. Casey stepped forward until her shadow swallowed Helen's aisle space. The aisle itself seemed to narrow, the overhead lights drawing harsh lines across the carpet as if the plane were shrinking to contain the scene. Mark her as non-compliant, Casey ordered. Her voice was crisp, clipped, practiced, too practiced. This wasn't protocol. This was performance. The younger attendant hesitated. Casey, her ticket scanned green. I saw it. Casey didn't even look at her. Then you scanned it wrong. Passengers exchanged glances. A man in a blazer whispered, but she hasn't even moved. A teenager craned his neck from row 4, trying to see over the seatback. Curiosity crackled through the cabin like static. Casey continued, working the system tablet with sharp, angry taps. She's obstructing first-class boarding and refusing seating instructions. That's grounds for removal. Her words weren't just loud, they were meant to be heard. Behind her, the wealthy couple from earlier approached, dressed in designer travel sets and entitlement. Oh, goodness, the woman murmured. Is there a problem? Casey's voice softened instantly. No, ma'am, we're just clearing an issue so you can be seated comfortably. The contrast struck Helen like a familiar chord. Different decade, same note. Then Casey said the line that shifted the cabin from uncomfortable to dangerous. Passengers dressed like this always try to sneak into sections they didn't pay for. Silence detonated. Emily inhaled sharply as if the words had been thrown at her. The pilot behind them blinked, stunned. Even the wealthy couple's smiles faltered. Helen stayed still, but her stillness wasn't soft anymore. It was steel cooling in open air. Casey, mistaking the silence for surrender, pressed harder. Security will be here in 2 minutes. If she's not in economy by then, we will have her escorted off this flight. Her tablet chimed. A red warning flashed across the screen, but not the one she expected. Emily leaned in, eyes widening. Casey, the system is asking for senior-level authorization before we can downgrade her seat. Casey scoffed. She's nobody. Override it. Emily swallowed. It's not letting me. Make. That single line, small, quiet, accidental, created a ripple that moved through the cabin like a wave hitting metal. Because for the first time since the spill, Helen's eyes lifted. Just slightly. And Casey suddenly looked like someone standing too close to a door she didn't realize was locked from the other side. Emily didn't mean to speak. The truth slipped out of her, the way light forces its way under a closed door, quiet, unwanted, unstoppable. Casey, her seat isn't invalid, and the system won't let us override her boarding class without higher clearance. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the tense hush of row 2, it landed with the weight of a confession. Casey turned, slow and sharp. Emily, step back. It's something's phrase, but the younger attendant's hands were already shaking, her breath unsteady as she stared at the glowing red prompt on the tablet. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't user error. Something about this passenger, this calm, motionless woman with a cooling stain on her sweater didn't align with the story Casey was building. Emily swallowed hard. I scanned her boarding pass myself. It wasn't fake. The words were soft, but the cabin reacted like she'd yelled them. A businessman in row 3 looked over his shoulder. A teenage girl lowered her headphones. A couple stopped mid-conversation. Truth changes a room faster than volume. Casey's jaw tightened. Are you questioning me in front of passengers? Emily's voice trembled, but she didn't step back. I'm saying she wasn't causing trouble. You bumped into her. You spilled the coffee. Gasps. Not loud, but collective, like an intake of shared disbelief. The pilot standing behind them shifted, concern deepening in the lines around his eyes. His posture said what he didn't dare voice. Something is wrong here. Casey's smile stretched too wide to be real. So now you're rewriting events? Be very careful, Emily. But Emily's eyes weren't on Casey anymore. They were on Helen. Something about Helen's stillness, the grounded, unshaken quiet, pulled at her. As if this woman had stood in storms far larger than this narrow cabin, and Emily was only now realizing she was witnessing one forming. Helen met her gaze. Not with gratitude. Not with fear. With recognition. As if she'd seen this exact moment years ago, someone young, someone scared, someone deciding whether silence or truth would define them. Emily straightened slightly. She didn't try to sneak into first class, she said, louder now, the words landing clean and bright. She belongs here. Casey stepped forward, fury cracking through her composure. You're done speaking. Do you hear me? Done. But the cabin already knew. Someone had shifted sides. And once a witness awakens, a room can no longer pretend it didn't see. The cabin didn't explode. It tightened like a fist closing around something fragile. Casey's smile vanished. Enough of this. She reached out and grabbed Helen's forearm, not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to send a message. You don't belong here. I get to move you. Gasps shot through the rows. A man stood halfway from his seat. Emily froze, horrified. Even the pilot muttered, Casey, don't. But she already had. Helen didn't pull away. Her arm remained steady, her posture rooted, as if her feet had fused to the cabin floor. The only movement was a single blink, slow, heavy, deliberate. Inside that blink was memory. 16 years old, Charlotte Airport, a hotel lobby she wasn't allowed to enter because guests don't look like you. 32 years old, a business lounge where a receptionist slid her passport back with 2 fingers and said, the premium area is for executives. 45. A meeting where a junior associate assumed she was the assistant, not the founder. All of it, every dismissal, every doubt, every sting of being measured by appearance instead of worth compressed into the moment. Casey's hand seized her arm. Back in the cabin, the grip remained. But something else shifted. The air changed temperature. Casey didn't notice. Arrogance dulls awareness. Stand up, she ordered, or security drags you out. Eyes. The wealthy couple behind Helen nodded approvingly, as if justice were being restored to their world. The woman whispered, finally. The man muttered, these people always push boundaries. Emily's breath hitched. Casey, stop. She didn't do anything wrong. She caused a mess, Casey snapped, pointing at the dried coffee stain like it was evidence of a crime. Passengers like her are always careless. Always. Helen raised her chin. Just slightly. And the rest of Casey's sentence died. Because Helen's eyes were no longer calm. They were ancient, the eyes of someone who had learned not only to endure storms, but to outlast them. She spoke for the first time. You spilled it. The cabin hushed. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't tremble. It didn't climb or crack. It simply landed, quiet and absolute, like a judge placing a final period on a verdict. Emily nodded quickly. It's true, I saw. Casey cut her off, voice breaking into sharp edges. No one cares what you saw. She's coming out of this cabin now. But the plane cared. The passengers cared. The silence itself cared. Because somewhere between the grab, the insult, and the rising heat of humiliation, the story had turned. And the breaking point was no longer Helen. Something subtle cracked in the cabin. Not a sound. A shift. It came from Helen. Not in her posture, not in her voice, not in any outward movement. It came from the decision forming quietly inside her, the way a storm decides to turn. She looked down at Casey's hand, still gripping her arm. Not with anger, with finality. Then, slowly, painfully slowly, Helen lifted her free hand, reached into her pocket, and tapped her phone's screen. One tap, clean, precise. As if she'd been waiting for this moment, for this exact escalation, the way a conductor waits for a cue. Carla, she said softly, activate Protocol 1. The words were gentle, but they ricocheted through the cabin like metal striking metal. Casey blinked. Protocol what? On the other end, Carla's voice came through crisp and composed. Protocol, 1 confirmed. Internal oversight notified. Executive board looped. All flight operations are being monitored in real time. Standing by. Rates of dollars. Passengers straightened. Emily's mouth fell open. The pilot behind them whispered, "Oh, God." Casey's hand slipped off Helen's arm as though burned. What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, but her voice cracked on the last syllable. Helen didn't answer her. Her gaze remained fixed forward, like someone staring down a corridor of inevitability. Carla continued, "Ma'am, would you like me to initiate stage 2? "Not yet," Helen murmured. "Let them reveal themselves fully." Hacked. Casey stepped back, color draining from her face. "Who are you calling? You can't threaten airline staff." "I didn't threaten anyone," Helen replied, still calm. "I made a notification." Emily whispered, "Casey, oversight only gets called when an executive is involved." The cabin inhaled as one. Casey shook her head violently. "No, she's bluffing. This is a tactic. She's trying to intimidate us." "You cat a day." But the pilot behind them, older, steadier, spoke for the first time with a voice low and wary. "Casey, you need to stop. Now." Casey spun toward him. "Why is everyone acting like she's somebody?" Helen finally turned her head, meeting Casey's eyes directly. Her expression didn't change, but the temperature of the space around them did. "You wanted compliance," Helen said quietly. "Now you'll have clarity." Then she lifted her phone again. "Carla, prepare stage 2. Azimut." And somewhere deep in the aircraft system, a notification pinged that would end careers. The ping from deep inside the aircraft's internal system wasn't loud, but everyone felt it. A vibration, a tension, a warning. Casey tried to regroup, squaring her shoulders as if authority could be rebuilt by force of will alone. "Everyone calm down," she snapped. "This passenger is trying to manipulate the situation. Protocols don't activate from a phone call." But her voice didn't land the same way it had minutes earlier. It didn't dominate. It wobbled. The pilot, the older one with steady hands, stepped closer to Helen, not threateningly, but with a strange, growing recognition. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "may I ask your name?" Helen didn't look at him. She looked at Casey. "Run it," Helen said. 2 words. Soft. But they detonated in the cabin, as if someone had blown open a sealed door. Emily's eyebrows shot up. The pilot stiffened. Casey laughed too loud, too brittle. "Run it. What does that even—" The pilot grabbed the crew tablet from Emily's hands. He typed, then paused. Something flickered across his face. Shock. Disbelief. Respect. Fear. He typed again, slower this time. The tablet flashed gold, a color no regular passenger had ever triggered. The pilot lifted his eyes, voice barely above a whisper. "Casey, she's not just a passenger." Casey snatched the tablet from him, frantic. She scanned the display, her face drained. "No. No, this is wrong. This must be a system error. She can't." Emily stepped closer, reading over her shoulder. Her breath caught. "Casey, that's her real clearance. That's executive-level access." The wealthy couple behind them went silent. A teenager leaned into the aisle for a better view. Even the engines seemed to hum quieter, as if the plane itself were listening. Helen finally moved just a tilt of her head, a razor-thin acknowledgement. Casey's voice cracked. You have no right to board like this. You should have notified us if you were—" Helen cut her off with a calm more devastating than anger. "You called me a disruptor," she said. "You called me a fraud." She let the words hang like suspended verdicts. Then she delivered the line that split the cabin in half. "And you said I didn't belong, in a section I helped create." A ripple went through the rows. Shock, realization, guilt, awe. Emily whispered, "Oh my God." "I have." Because now it was undeniable. The woman they tried to humiliate was one of the highest-ranking people associated with the airline. And the humiliation had just changed direction. The moment the truth settled into the cabin, something else began to unravel. Casey's authority. Not suddenly, not explosively, but like fabric tearing under too much strain. Casey clutched the crew tablet to her chest as if holding it tighter could rewrite the words glowing on the screen. This doesn't mean anything," she stammered. "Clearance can be spoofed. She probably hacked." The older pilot cut in, firm now. No passenger can trigger an executive tier verification. That system is sealed behind the board's internal firewall. A murmur rippled through the first-class cabin. Emily stepped forward, voice steady for the first time all flight. Casey, the system flagged you, not her. It's recording every interaction. Casey froze. What? Emily pointed at the tablet. A blinking red banner read, Oversight Review initiated crew behavior under audit. Passengers leaned in, whispering. Some lifted phones. One man muttered, She's in real trouble. If. Casey tried to reclaim the cabin with her voice. The same voice that had commanded it effortlessly minutes before. Everyone please remain seated. This is a misunderstanding. Management will resolve this when we land. But nobody listened. Even the wealthy couple she'd favored earlier pulled back, distancing themselves as if they might catch the fallout. Helen hadn't moved. Her stillness was no longer quiet. It was gravitational. Casey's composure splintered. What do you want from me? She snapped at Helen. An apology? I was doing my job. Helen finally lifted her gaze. Not harsh. Not triumphant. Simply clear. You were performing your bias, she said, and calling it policy. The line slid through the cabin like a blade made of truth. Emily exhaled shakily. The pilot bowed his head. Even the engines seemed to hum lower, as if bracing for what came next. Then, another notification chimed on the crew tablet. A deeper tone. Heavier. Emily read it aloud, voice barely a whisper. Executive Board Representative en route to communication channel. Stand by for formal inquiry. Casey staggered back as though the floor had tilted. Because this was no longer about a messy sweater, or a seat assignment, or a passenger she thought she could push around. This was the collapse. The moment when everyone in the cabin understood. The person who had seemed powerless had been holding the ground beneath them the entire time. No one spoke. The silence wasn't empty now. It was charged, humming with the awareness that something irreversible was unfolding. Casey stood rigid, eyes darting between Helen, the pilots, and the blinking red notifications on the crew tablet. Her authority, which once wrapped the cabin like a net, now hung in tatters around her feet. Everyone is overreacting, she said, voice thin. She's just a passenger with some kind of upgraded status. That doesn't mean... Helen finally stepped forward. Just one step, but it was enough to shift every spine in the cabin. Up close, the dried coffee stain on her sweater looked almost ceremonial, like a mark of every slight she had endured to reach the power she now held. Upgraded status, Helen repeated gently, almost amused. Is that what you think this is? Her tone wasn't mocking. It was worse. It was knowing. Casey swallowed, throat tight. Passengers don't get protocol-level access. That must have been a mistake. Helen held her gaze without blinking. It wasn't. Emily whispered to the pilot. She knew exactly what she was doing. She waited for this. The pilot nodded solemnly. That's someone who has been here before, just on the other side of things. Casey tried one last defense. You can't just call the board and get me audited. Only executives can. She stopped. The realization hit her mid-sentence. Helen didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to gesture. She didn't need to say the words explicitly. The cabin already understood the truth, but Helen said it anyway. Quiet, sharp, deliberate. I didn't call the board, Casey. The board answers when I call. The line rolled through the aircraft like thunder with no sound, felt, not heard. A woman in row 3 covered her mouth. A teenager whispered, Holy, she's someone huge. Arius. The wealthy couple sat back, suddenly small in their designer seats. Casey stared at Helen as if seeing her for the first time. You're not just an owner, are you? Helen's expression didn't change. I've spent my life being told where I don't belong. And somehow, I still built the spaces people try to push me out of. The words hit harder than any shout. Then the final notification chimed, a deep, resonant tone that pulled the entire cabin into stillness. Emily read it with trembling breath. Executive Review Panel connected. Await directive from shareholder authority. Every eye swung toward Helen. Because the panel wasn't connecting to talk to Casey. They were connecting because Helen Porter, the woman with the stained sweater, was the authority. The overhead speakers clicked. a soft, sterile sound that quieted even the engines. Then a voice came through, measured, official, unmistakably authoritative. Flight 381 crew, this is Executive Review Panel Liaison. We are receiving a live audit feed from your cabin. Stand by. Passengers stiffened. Phones lowered. Even the pilot straightened like a soldier called to formation. Casey's fingers dug into the crew tablet. This has gone too far. You can't investigate me mid-flight. That's not... The speaker cut her off. Cabin leader Casey Reed. We have documented a sequence of procedural violations and conduct concerns. Your credentials are being reviewed. Emily exhaled shakily. The older pilot closed his eyes. Casey's face drained of color. What? No, you can't do that. This is based on her word. She's manipulating all of you. You don't understand. Helen turned, calm as ever. No one here is reacting to my word, Casey. They're reacting to your actions. The line steadied the entire cabin. Casey pointed at the stain on Helen's sweater, her last flimsy shield. She caused a disturbance. She refused orders. Emily stepped forward. She didn't refuse anything. You grabbed her. You escalated. And the spill, you caused it. Everyone saw the replay. A beat. Then the speaker confirmed it. Video evidence from passenger recordings and galley camera corroborates misconduct. Casey staggered back. You're taking their side? Over a crew member? Over me? Helen finally faced her fully. I'm not on one side or the other. I'm on the side of accountability. The cabin absorbed the sentence like scripture. Another chime sounded on the tablet. A colder one. Emily read it. Steady now. Cabin leader Casey Reed. Immediate removal from duty is under consideration. Pending shareholder confirmation. The wealthy couple gasped. A teenager covered his mouth. The businessmen nodded with slow, grave satisfaction. Casey shook her head violently. She's just a passenger. She can't authorize anything. She doesn't have that kind of power. Then, as if the universe wanted to answer for Helen, the liaison's voice returned. Shareholder authority is present in the cabin. We await her directive. All eyes turned to the woman with the stained sweater. Not with pity, not with confusion, with realization. Helen wasn't simply a victim of bias. She was the lever the entire system turned on. The cabin no longer felt like an airplane. It felt like a courtroom suspended at 30,000 feet. And Helen was the one every judgment orbited around. Casey's breathing turned shallow, frantic. Please, this is a misunderstanding, she whispered, voice stripped of all the confidence she'd worn like armor minutes earlier. I've served this airline for 12 years. I'm respected. I'm trusted. I was following protocol. Helen's eyes didn't waver. Protocol doesn't include humiliation. Is sir? The liaison's voice returned over the speakers, steady, sterile, immune to emotion. Shareholder authority, please confirm. Shall cabin leader Casey Reed be removed from duty for the remainder of the flight pending investigation? Casey shook her head, backing toward the bulkhead. Ma'am, please, don't do this. You don't understand what this will do to me. Emily stepped forward, tears in her eyes, but not for Casey, for the weight of truth finally cracking open. You did this to yourself. They didn't plessivid have backed. Passengers murmured. A mother whispered. She crossed the line. A businessman muttered. This is accountability in real time. The teenager, in row 4, recorded every second, wide-eyed. Then, the older pilot spoke, voice gravelly with disappointment. Casey, you put the entire crew at risk. You put our integrity at risk. And for what? Pride? He bowed his head, as if the fall of a colleague burdened him personally. You should step down. The words landed harder than any order. Casey turned helplessly to Helen. You want an apology? Fine. I'm sorry. Is that enough? Her voice cracked, desperate. Helen didn't answer immediately. She looked at the stain on her sweater, the symbol of every dismissal, every assumption, every moment someone decided she wasn't worthy of a space she helped build. Then she raised her chin. No, Helen said softly. An apology fixes a mistake. Accountability prevents it. The speakers chimed, a calm, clinical tone. Shareholder directive received. Emily glanced at the tablet, breath catching. She read aloud. Effective immediately. Cabin leader Casey Reed is relieved of duty. Access revoked. Authority transferred to senior pilot until landing. Casey gasped as her badge vibrated, then went dark. Her last shred of power. Extinguished. A hush rippled through the cabin. Helen didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply stepped back into silence. The kind of silence that wasn't passive, but victorious. And the cabin, almost reverently, shifted its weight toward her, toward the woman who had never needed to raise her voice, to change the entire room. The cabin exhaled, not loudly, not chaotically, but with the soft release that follows a storm, finally recognizing its end. Casey stood against the bulkhead, badge dark, authority gone. Emily stepped back into position, hands trembling but posture proud. The senior pilot lifted the crew tablet with solemn professionalism, assuming command with a nod toward Helen, a gesture of respect, earned and acknowledged. For the first time since the coffee spilled, the plane felt balanced. Passengers settled into their seats, though their eyes never left Helen, some with awe, some with disbelief, some with the quiet shame of having witnessed cruelty and done nothing until the moment justice arrived. Helen took a slow breath and finally sat, not in defeat, but in reclamation. Her sweater, still marked with the dried stain, seemed almost emblematic now, not of humiliation, but of survival. Emily approached timidly. "Ma'am, may I get you something? A warm towel? A fresh sweater from first-class inventory?" Helen looked up at her, a softness returning to her eyes. "No, dear, leave it." She brushed a finger across the stain, not to hide it, but to acknowledge it. "Some marks are meant to be seen." Emily swallowed, moved, changed. The senior pilot stepped forward. "Miss Porter, on behalf of this flight, and this crew except for one, we apologize." Helen nodded with grace that felt decades deep. "Apology accepted," she said. "Make sure the lesson is, too." The line settled over the cabin like warm air after turbulence, steadying, grounding. A chime sounded through the speakers one last time. Executive review panel logging off. Cabin transfer complete. The storm was over. Helen looked out the window as the clouds drifted by soft, unbothered, endless. Her voice, when she finally spoke again, wasn't meant for Casey, or the passengers, or even the crew. It was meant for anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong somewhere they built with their own hands. "I didn't raise my voice," she murmured quietly. "I raised the standard." Emily heard her. So did the pilot. And so did every passenger close enough to catch the way the line folded the entire moment into meaning. As the cabin lights warmed and the plane found its calm, the story of what happened on Flight 381 settled into its final truth. Sometimes justice doesn't shout. Sometimes it simply arrives. With composure, with clarity, with a woman who refuses to be moved from a place she already owns.